all the time.
All right, here we go. Good evening, everybody. Here we are. What month is this? February? We have one more month until the ILEETA conference, 2025 ILEETA, 27 days until the conference. Who all's ready?
Oh, so ready.
We are so ready. So Joe Willis, Todd Fletcher, and myself, Brian Hill, are here with wonderful guest, Tom Manson. And we're just going to jump right into this because Tom likes to talk. We had a great discussion here about an hour before this. So, Tom, for those that don't know who you are, just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what you've done, what you're doing, and where you're going.
Sure. Hey, guys, first of all, thank you for letting me join you for ILEETA Live. I have seen several of these and never thought I would be in this chair to enjoy this spot. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity just to chat. ILEETA has been an important thing for me, and I'll kind of hopefully touch on that as we go. But background for me, I grew up in Indiana, a small town on the western edge. Dad was a plumber, mom was a nurse, so had a pretty simple blue collar background. Dad put the three kids through college. Said he didn't want me to be a plumber, so I worked with him for a while until college came around, and I went to Indiana State. Actually failed out after a couple of years. Irish Catholic background, so kind of given to some strong drink a little bit occasionally. Joe, don't hold that against me, but part of my deal. Came back to college, had my focus at that point, and finished a degree at Indiana State. From that point, I went to Wichita, Kansas, where I went to grad school. So worked out there and taught college for a while. Eventually finished that degree. I came back to Indiana and started teaching college there. And I thought that was going to be that'd be my path. Law enforcement was not a direction that I was going in. I'd had experience with law enforcement, stopped, arrested, had my run-ins with the law. I was from Western Indiana, not a lot, Todd, to do out there in Western Indiana. So, that was the beginning, but I was teaching at Indiana State University and I got a phone call from a buddy of mine. He said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm sitting in my office, holding office hours, waiting for, students to come and gain knowledge from me." And he said, "Man, you should get out of there. You should get out of that job." He said, "My agency is hiring. You'd be a perfect fit. We got guns and trucks and we're chasing people." He said, "You should do that." I said, "Well, where should I go? What should I do?" And he said, "Go to Orange County." He said, "They're doing expedited hiring." And he said, they do it all at once. Normally at the federal system, it takes like a long time to do this thing. He said, this is all in like a 3 or 4 week process. You go out there and that's what you should do. So I took his advice. Once the semester ended, I went to Orange County, California, had a little bit of money in my pocket, and went out there and went through expedited hiring and eventually got hired with the U.S. Border Patrol. Permanent duty station was Brownsville Station, McAllen Sector. And I eventually take the oath of office and swear in South Texas. So that started my federal law enforcement career. It was a short-lived career for me as an active agent. I wound up getting injured, and I was I was part of the big green wave of the 90s. So if you're old enough to know, there's a big influx back in the 90s where the Border Patrol was the big green machine and they were hiring a lot of people. I wound up actually paying my pound of flesh. I broke an ankle and a knee. Spent about a year rehabbing, learning to walk again. It was a very ignoble end to my federal service, but it's what launched me into training. and it really made all the difference. The time the Border Patrol was a critical time for me. I was in my 20s, and it was foundational. In fact, everything I did after that was really in some ways based on that. So the time with the Border Patrol was great, but when I out processed, I would eventually start looking for a different job. So I'd gone federal, so state and local, I thought, I wasn't quite sure where that was going to be, and I'd been sitting on COP for quite a while, which, if you don't know the federal system, that's continuation of pay. Of course, that was the joke in the federal system, was like, where do you see yourself in 5 years if you're an agent? You're like, well, hopefully with like an injured finger on COP, continuation of pay, making some money somewhere, just kind of chilling. So when I talk to some other agencies, they're like, well, what have you been doing? I'm like, well, we've been rehabbing for a while. That sort of put the mark of Cain on you, that, if you've been rehabbing for like a year, they're not like, man, we can use a guy like you. That's exactly what we need. So I had a background in training at this point. I had a background in training before I even joined the Border Patrol. So I started shopping my shingle around to figure out where I could go. And I landed in Indianapolis with the Public Agency Training Council. This is a training company, still exists and still does a lot of training throughout the United States. They hired me to initially do a manual for some of their marketing. They had a new marketing machinery process that they were working on. They wanted me to train people on that. And I thought, maybe that was a thing. And the director at the time, said, what else can you do? And I said, well, I could do immigration law and nationality law, and I could do, I started naming all these federal classes I'd taken. He's like, no, nobody wants any of that stuff. You can't sell, I can't sell that. He said, but we do have a spot. He said, how are you with PowerPoint? I'm like, PowerPoint? I'm like, I know PowerPoint, but I'm not teaching PowerPoint. I was a federal agent. I had advanced degrees in theory and research. I traveled the world by this point. I'm like, I'm damn sure not doing PowerPoint for anybody. He said, well, you could go back to the border, or you could teach PowerPoint with us nationally. I'm like, man, that's all you had to say. I'm a PowerPoint guy, dude. That's what I do. I'm a PowerPoint instructor. I was made for this. I'm like, where do I stand? He's like, come here. This is what you do. He's like, I've got about 30 instructors that are national instructors, and they are all, it was interesting because they were like the first generation law enforcement instructors that were kind of like on a national stage. You think of hostage negotiations back in the 70s. So Frank Bowles was one of the guys. You just look up hostage negotiation. Frank Bowles taught with PATC. Vernon Gebreath was practical homicide investigation. He wrote a book that's like this thick that was just about practical homicide investigation. And in the 80s and early 90s, you think, well, today we have all these TV shows like, CSI and homicide this and homicide that. But there was a time in the late 70s and 80s in which some guy codified what we're studying now in each of these subjects. And that goes back to, we think of like a PR-24 for like defensive tactics. And like, when someone finally gets this device and they really start working on it, PATC coalesced a lot of these people. And I got to work with these people to take their material that was on, slides and acetate sheets and, flip charts and whiteboards, digitize that for them and get that into a program that then they could teach. So that program, of course, was PowerPoint. And because of the federal credential and because some of the background I had at this point, I did know something about narcotics. I did know something about federal law enforcement, and I knew a lot about the academy at this point, knew a lot about how law enforcement was being trained. So I got a big baptism with each one of these instructors, and, they were all like type AAA personalities. They thought they were, everything, that the sun rose and fell upon them and their class. And, yes, they all apparently worked for God. It was not just like every single one of them. I'm like, how many servants of the Lord can one company have? But apparently it was like about 20. So I got to work with those guys, and I also got to train with them. I got to go around the country with each of these individual instructors and work with them, it was a breadth and depth of experience that I never would have gotten with the Border Patrol, right? Like I never would have had the opportunity to work with NYPD hostage negotiators ever. I never would have gotten to work with Miami cold case homicide investigators ever. I worked with LAPD internal affairs investigators, right? There was never a chance that would have happened. And I got to work with each of these individuals and help them with their courses, help build their courses nationally. So that was my process. And then I also started teaching PowerPoint. So I started going out and teaching PowerPoint for law enforcement, PowerPoint for public safety. And I think that was a class a couple of you have caught. I was talking to Todd Fletcher last week, and Todd was like, man, I think you taught a PowerPoint class back in Oregon back in the day. And I'm like, yeah, that was me, man. That was absolutely me. So I worked with PATC for about 6 years. And in around 2005, I started Police Technical. So Police Technical was just me. I left PATC and hung my own shingle again. And at this point, I was teaching PowerPoint, and I was doing a lot of narcotics work. So I really started targeting narcotics. I started doing a lot of officer involved shooting work. I touched some fairly big cases. Started doing some missing persons cases, homicide work as well. Did a few capital cases. Worked with a lot of prosecutors, both AUSAs at the federal level, all the way down to state and local folks. And I was telling Joe, this is a few weeks ago when we first started kind of chatting again, when I left PATC, ILEETA, this is where the ILEETA like crossroads comes in. Joe, was when I started with PATC, I joined ASLET, which, as I don't know whether everyone on the channel knows or whether everyone knows, but ASLET was the precursor. It was the American Society for Law Enforcement
Training.
Yeah, trains. Yeah. So I joined ASLET, and I was looking for my ASLET card the other day, and somehow it's gone. But I joined ASLET, and of course, the strange thing about ASLET was after I joined, like a few months later, ASLET like tick 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 boom, just like it somehow detonated or exploded. I'm sure that's another podcast somewhere, but EdnoWiki was with that, and then from the ashes came ILEETA, and it was sometime when I was with PATC that I joined ILEETA, and I went to a conference. My first ILEETA conference was up in the northwest suburbs, whether it was Chicago suburbs, whether it was Wheeling or Schaumburg or somewhere up there, and I got to see and meet all of these people whose names I'd read as a byline. Right, they'd run in like Handgunner magazine and all these different law enforcement related magazines, and every one of these cats was there. They were at this conference, talking about their stuff. And I was just blown away. I was like, man, this could be my group. This would be really cool. This is my group. And I told you guys the story earlier on the break, but leaving that first year's conference, I'm in the car ready to go. And the car's like in drive. I'm ready to drive away from the hotel, just really jazzed about the whole experience, everything I saw. And I see Massad Ayoob, who's like, just a nationally renowned figure in my mind. And I think rightfully so. I mean, Massad had been massing around for a long time. And I put the car in park, and I got out, and Mass is kicking a cigarette right outside he's like under an awning. And I came over to him, and I'm like, hey, longtime listener, really just wanted to chat up and say hello, and I just wanted to know how much I appreciated. I don't know what, just him being there. Yeah, and he was so genuine to me, and he didn't know me from Adam, and I was certainly nobody. And he just said, hey, I really appreciate you being here, and really glad to have you. And I was like, man, I just walked away from that conference feeling great, right? I just really did. And the thing about Ed Nowicki with ILEETA, and I'll never forget this about Ed, was when I went out on my own. I mean, I was really going out on my own, right? Starting a company from scratch, teaching a subject that was PowerPoint for law enforcement. I mean, this is not a subject that there was anyone clamoring for. I can tell you that. There was like not a huge there was not a huge audience saying, man, where's that PowerPoint class? We need that, right? That's the thing I want to take. This was not the course anyone even wanted. So I talked to Ed about it. And when I left PATC, Ed was a huge supporter. And he said, there's a venue for you here. It's an important subject, and we'd love to have you. Because I didn't know, I was under a big umbrella at PATC, and I didn't know when I came back just as me, whether they would want that. And, you don't really know which way the winds are blowing. And Ed said, it's a great class. We'd love to have you back. And his support changed everything. And when I went back to Chicago, we were at in the lobby of this hotel. We're at this little group, and it's like a table of instructors, right? It's one of those like pre-conference things where the instructors kind of getting together. And I'm sitting at a table with Mass, right? I'm sitting at a table with Masad Ayub and like 2 or 3 other guys that were like huge names, and they're instructors at ILEETA, and so was I. It's like, this is crazy, right? This is crazy to me that I'm sitting at a table talking to these guys about, I'm going to do my class, I'm going to do this. And it was really, really, just totally charged me for years. So that was my ILEETA crossroads. And I would begin to grow police technical. We'd start growing. I was doing a technical class. So again, this is like this specific niche part of law enforcement training that I was trying to carve out. And I had a couple agencies I was working with. Again, the HIDAs, narcotic related agencies, they were bread and butter for me for a long time. And they would say things like, well, we really like your class. It was a great class, good job. But do you do a class on data? Because we've got a need for like maybe an Excel class, like a heavy data class. And I'm like, nah, it's not really my thing. And they're like, oh, that's too bad, because we had a check we were going to write you if you could have taught this class. And I was like, whoa.
It might be my thing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't.
That is my thing.
I know a guy.
I think I know a guy. So I got on the phone and, so we began to grow a little bit that way. It was really organic because I needed an Excel person and I needed some big data people. Social media was just becoming a thing. Officers were still getting fired for social media, right? I mean, the posts that they had, like, hey, here's my duty weapon and here's me doing crazy things with it. You're fired. So we did social media classes, and we eventually started growing into dark web and online investigations. And so that was where police technical came into play. So we started growing this technical company. And for a while, I was on the road 40 weeks a year. So I was traveling every week, teaching a 2-day course, coast to coast, Seattle, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, New York, Arizona, every place in between, Denver. Made it out to Brush, Colorado a couple times with some type of, Colorado funding for bringing technical courses to the hinterlands, way out west. Idaho, any place where there was enough law enforcement together that you could actually run a class. Like, there's still a few places I haven't been, but there's only like 6 cops there, so that's why I never made it.
Well, we got to bring them to ILEETA. That's
yeah,
how we
I know.
get them into one
That's
place.
when they go to shoot. That's when they go to St. Louis. That's where they go, gathering up, and kind of what the reconnection with us, and the reconnection with Joe and I, and really with ILEETA, a couple of years ago in 2024, I became the executive director for policetraining.net, which is the name down here. And policetraining.net is the calendar for law enforcement, right? So that's my current entity that we're kind of chasing down. It's a 25-year on-site calendar of all law enforcement training. We've got thousands of classes and thousands of agencies and training organizations that we've worked with. So that's been the most recent thing. But that connection has kind of brought us back to ILEETA. Years ago, Police Technical went sort of down a different path. We went down GSA federal contract. So we started pursuing federal contracting, and that took us in a completely different direction. So we kind of fell out from doing some of the individual training and some of the different individual events that I was doing on the road for so long. So it's kind of good to be back. We're back with ILEETA. We're doing things completely differently now because of policetraining.net. Instead of me trying to teach a PowerPoint class for a bunch of dudes that may or may not want it, policetraining.net's a totally different kind of deal.
Wow. What an experience. You've done a lot, and you've trained everything from, good grief, PowerPoint to, Excel. What was your most rewarding class that you have taught? And why and tell us why.
Most rewarding, it's interesting. There's you get the big ones, and then there's the little ones. I think here's the biggest one I ever did. When I was training in Texas, and I'm doing this Texas conference, and it's probably T-Cole. It was T-Close then at the time. It was T-Cole now. And I think they had, I don't know how many people they had at the conference, 500, 600, 700,000 people. And I'm teaching PowerPoint, right? These are all trainers. So these are all Texas trainers. So these are my people. And of course, I did my time in Brownsville, Texas. So that kind of played a little bit. I'm not Texan, but it was okay. And I've got a morning session. With this group, and I've got like 300 people in the room, right? It's this conference, and they've got chairs stacked up so far I can't even see the back, right? I mean, there's a ton of people, and there's only like 2 or 3 sessions going, so you're going to get a whole lot of people in this room. So I got my gig, and I'm doing like 2 hours, right? I'm doing like the morning session, and I do this session. I think it goes pretty well, and the director comes up and says, "Hey, one of the afternoon people is not going to make it, so you did a pretty good job in the morning session. Can you do a plenary session?" And I'm like, "Plenary session? Yeah. I don't even know what plenary session is." Well, yeah, I can. Yeah, absolutely, I can do it. Like, I'm thinking plenary probably means like just do another session, right? So I'm like, "Yeah, sure, let's go." So he's like, "Okay, great." He'll do the plenary, and as soon as he says that, they start taking down the wall, right? There's like a 40-foot folding vertical wall between this little room I'm in, and they start taking down this wall. They start putting it, unfold this thing and shoving it back inside the wall. And then I'm like realizing, wait a minute, plenary means everybody, right? It doesn't mean like a few people. It means the whole conference. And I'm like, man, I just did my thing, right? And half these people just saw my thing. So it's sort of like a magician or something, like a comedy routine, right? They've already seen my gig. And I'm like, oh man, this is crazy. So I go from having the biggest class I've ever had in my life to having the biggest class I've ever seen in my life, right? I mean, I've been to some conferences before, but I'd never even been to a conference that was as big as this Texas conference. And I've got all these people. And I'm like, okay, this is it. This is like my moment, right? This is the crucible. If you're in law enforcement training, this is the crucible right here. So I do that session, and honestly, I thought it went pretty well, right? I mean, I thought I'm not sure. Honestly, if you would ask me, I probably thought I would have killed that room, right? I killed that room because I thought, it was what I was built for. I was made for this. And really the room couldn't have been bigger. I mean, it couldn't have been big enough, right? There could have been twice as many people. I would sort of like that too. But I get done with the whole thing, and there's people coming up and saying, "Hey, that was a great, great job. It's information we needed, and that was really great." And there's an older guy that comes up to me at the very end of this thing, and he says, "He said, you thought you did a pretty good job out there. Pretty good class." I said, "Yeah, I thought, yeah, I knew I killed it." And he's like, "Let me tell you something. Let me tell you something about training. You're not famous and nobody knows you." I was like, "What? I'm not famous and nobody knows me. I just killed that room. Do you not see what I just did? I killed that room." And you're like, "You're not famous and nobody knows you." I'm like, okay. So he like dramatically took me down like every notch, but then he said, "I'm the director of Houston ILEETA, and I'd like you to come out and talk to some of my people." And I said, "Sir, I'd be glad to do that. I'd be glad to come out and talk to your folks." So as far as a room, a room, that's a big one. That one's huge for me. Just like, you think about groups you've done and things that were impactful. I did another one time where I was in Chicago or in Philly, and I got a big room again. I mean, it's set for like 500 people. There's seats everywhere. And I think it was a 2-session group. It was me speaking, and I think it was Danny McKnight. Is that right? Black Hawk Down?
Yeah, that's Black Hawk Down. I don't know if that's who it was, but yeah,
that's who it was. So I'm doing PowerPoint, and Danny's doing Black Hawk Down in the room next door. So I've got a room set for like 500 seats, and I can hear the laughing and the crying and the applause and the cheering. And I think they carried Danny out on their shoulders at the end of the session. And 600 people are chanting, "Danny, Danny," at the end of the whole thing. And that's his intro, right? He hasn't even begun doing his program. I've got like 3 people 50 rows back. And I'm like, "Well, I'd like to welcome all 3 of you to PowerPoint." And I talked to a couple of them and I said, "Hey, could you come a little closer to the front? Because it'll make the session a lot easier for me if you're a little closer." And they said, "Well, we'd like to be in the back." And I said, "Listen, brother, if you're in the first row, you're going to be in the back. So, you just come all the way down." So
and they're probably thinking to themselves, "Back here at the back, it's easier for me to sneak out."
Right. That's the thing. If you only got 3 people, I'm not letting you sneak out, man. You're not creeping out. You're staying. Don't tell me you're taking the phone call third person and leaving my PowerPoint session. You're staying.
I'm teaching this from the door, right? Nobody's getting past me.
I can physically hold you if I can touch you in my class if you're in the first row.
Oh wow!
But Brian, there's one other thing too. If you're talking about the big class, the thing that's important, it's not just the size. And obviously, if you're an instructor and if you're teaching somewhere, you want to have a lot of classes. You want to feel like you're making a lot of impact. But I've had classes before, just small local classes, right? You got 10, 15, 20 people in a room, and I've had the investigator before ask me, they're like, "Hey, I'm working on this thing and it's a really important thing to me and it's really critical to me. Would you stick around and talk to me about this thing?" And, that's the thing, right? I mean, at 5 o'clock, and if you've been standing teaching all day long, doing your gig, whatever it is, that hotel's looking pretty good, and Wendy's cheeseburger is looking pretty good, and it'd be really easy to bail out. But talking, and there's 2 or 3 of them that kind of ring in my mind, but talking to someone afterwards, I've sat there till 9 or 10 o'clock at night going through case management with them, and talking to some people about case management, about what they're going to do with PowerPoint, how they're going to organize this case to present to a prosecutor. Turns out that, sometimes not that at all. We're talking about radically different things. They don't need case management. I mean, they just need investigation 101. They need some basic skills that had nothing to do with PowerPoint at all. I've rallied, a couple different people in a room and said, hey, can you hang out? Can you hang out for Bobby for just a little bit? Can you just stick around here a little bit? Because, you realize this guy's local to this state and he's got more information than I do, or this guy's a deeper investigator than these guys have. Can we sit here for a while? And, those things are meaningful. I had a case one time. I was in the St. Louis area, and I had a birther case. I'd never done this thing before at all. You get used to do a lot of narcotics cases, officer involved shooting cases, and they get kind of similar. The structure of what you're going to do with this thing and how you're going to put together a PowerPoint, or how we'll do it for the investigation, or how we'll do it to present to a prosecutor, became kind of the same thing, right? But I had a guy who had this case, and he said he was describing this case that he had, where a couple was sending pictures of the woman pregnant, and the story was, she was pregnant, she was going to have twins, and she couldn't have the children, so she was going to put them up for adoption. And the people that she was talking to, they were marks, right? They were the targets. And as he's describing this case, I mean, you've got like some type of levels of criminality. You got like a cat burglar that's, obviously Bobby's doing wrong. It's kind of naughty for him to break in and like, steal your jewels or something. But this is like a whole different level, right? This is like some really bad stuff. And of course, people changed jobs. They bought houses. They moved across state lines to different places to support what they thought was going to be a family. And, sticking around helping someone like that to put their case together, that stuff leaves a mark for sure.
Sure.
Yeah. But it's also nice to have a big room. It's also good to have a 1,000 people in the room listening to you.
Yeah. I think we can all relate to those small classes and a big class as well. So
yeah.
I think that's half the fun of our chosen, space to be in, right? Is that, finding that opportunity where you are the lecturer, there's not a lot of time for facilitation. And then the challenge of bringing it down to this is truly meaningful to me. I mean, there was, at one point, this almost one-on-one conversation that you get to have with this person, and it's largely about facilitating around them and their situation. And I think we can all kind of relate to that. You brought up something about the niches, right? And being niched. And I'd like to kind of revisit that with you if you have a half second here. Like, what would you say to those who are listening who really, they see the big picture of all this space training can go? What would you tell them as far as, look as far as you can, but, pay attention to the niches and that kind of thing, guidance in that space? What would you say?
Yeah. One of the things when I went through FLETC, and FLETC was great in a lot of ways. I went through Charleston, South Carolina, so it was a satellite facility of FLETC. And we've spoken about academies, right? We've spoken about law enforcement academies and the need for the purpose behind that, right? You're looking to get a lot of people through. You're getting a lot of people trained to a certain degree. And the interesting thing about, and it's not everyone at ILEETA, right? I mean, ILEETA is a kind of a different animal because you've got people that are really, really agency level trainers. And then you've got private companies that are there. You've got people that are doing a lot of different aspects of law enforcement training. But the niche thing is really what is outside that academy, right? It is the thing that almost always comes from outside. And when I would talk to trainers, both in the various aspects of my life that are doing something, they almost always bring that thing that is not being taught at the academy, right? It's a different animal completely. And that was kind of what, hopefully that was what I did with PowerPoint. when I came out of the Federal Academy, I realized, okay, they don't really know much about PowerPoint. They don't know a lot about instructor development. We saw manuals that I swear had been mimeographed and, photocopied. They're like, the text is off like this, and it's like someone had like used a whiteout over the 1953, thing down the bottom, and you're like, wait a minute, I think this came out of the federal program a long time before I was born. And that's what they would use. So when the trainers that I like to work with and the trainers that I like to be was that person that really was finding that thing that was different, that thing that hadn't been trained. And there is always a need for academy instructors. There's always a need for someone that's going to follow that doctrine to provide that basis, that foundation. That's a calling. It's something that I never got to do. Actually, I never really got to do that, but I think that's a really strong calling, and that meets a lot of people at ILEETA. But when you get out there, and you start hanging your own shingle, doing your own thing. You need to find that niche. That niche is pretty valuable. Everyone says, I think we've all said this about great training, whatever it was, that's not what I got at the academy. That's not what I got at the academy. And you're like, that was really cool. Like, how was that class? And you're like, oh, that was, it was a different level than what I got at the academy. And that's kind of like that niche, whether that's weapons training or DT or, whatever the subject is.
Nothing is more motivating to me at this point in my career than getting the opportunity to engage with an instructor who is truly passionate about that one thing. It is, the forensic interview of young children, or the whatever it is, or how to extract data off a cell phone. Guy, I couldn't care less about this cell phone thing you're talking about. What I care about is you and your passion. And I think you hit the nail on the head, man. I love seeing that. So with policetraining.net, you kind of do that, don't you? Like, you kind of bring out the niches and you give them a platform to say, this is me and this is what I'm into, right?
Man, it's every niche.
Yeah.
It is every niche, nook and cranny. So it is the big things. I don't want to take away from the big things, because there are there are big organizations, associations, and there are a lot of people doing mainline stuff. But when you start talking about like all these people that do this thing, and it is fun to talk to people that get jazzed about their thing, right? And when someone is super jazzed about, whatever their subject is, we've got about 53 different subjects on there. And I'll talk to people on a regular basis from this subject to this subject. This guy's like, yeah, social media investigation, this is where it's at.
Everything, right? Yeah. And to them it is, and to others it is, right? So important. I love seeing that in them. Yes.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's awesome to see, guys. And you have to kind of like, I have to meter myself, because when I'm talking to people, like, this guy is completely jazzed about this subject, just like I was about PowerPoint, which is, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, PowerPoint. It didn't matter who I talked to about my past. If it was someone in education, if it was someone in law enforcement, they're like, so what are you doing now? And I'm like, I teach PowerPoint. They're like, oh, okay, life's going just like you planned. I can tell. You're really killing it. Your life took you where you wanted to go. And I'm like, no, it's okay. It's pretty good. It's okay. But every one of these cats that I talk to, every company owner, instructor, association, whether it's a large association, you think of like National Sheriff's Association, which is a very large entity, that very, very proud historic group, or whether it's a smaller guy doing one thing, they are jazzed about their thing, and they are fired up about their thing, and they do want to tell other people about it. And I can help them. I can help you. Call me.
So thinking back to the early ILEETA conferences that you were at, and I'm wearing my old school ILEETA shirt today.
Let's go.
That, right?
Let's go.
since you haven't been to a conference in a while,
Yeah.
tell me some things looking back that you're looking forward to. What do you expect to be the same? What do you expect to be different?
The first thing, and I've answered this question too from like a couple different standpoints. Several folks that I'm still connected with from ILEETA days, from the original days. I just want to see some of those people, right? I mean, I was an instructor there. I trained. I did my sessions for, I don't know, several years, and I had a lot of folks that saw my class and saw me doing my thing. I'd love to see who's there. I'd love to see what's happening with them. I'm looking forward to seeing people that were there when I was there last. It's always kind of fun. It's kind of like a high school reunion in some ways, kind of a weird way. You catch up with some of these people online and you kind of follow their careers various ways. Mary Grace Barbie said that, people come in the field and then they kind of go out of the field, and they kind of bounce into one thing, they kind of bounce into another. And I've seen that happen. It's happened to me too. So I think just first of all, looking at some of the people that I saw in the past to see what's happened with them. So we kind of rekindle that and see what's going on with them. That'll be the first thing. I'm interested in seeing your sessions. I'm interested in seeing how the conference has developed. I was looking at the color coding that Joe is doing now on the schedule. So I was really like looking over the schedule to see where the expo is, because we've obviously going to have a little table at the expo and we'll be passing out swag and stuff. But looking at the classes and how things are structured, I really wanted to see what was happening. ILEETA, of course, when I first started with ASLET, ILEETA, I think, really had a heavy, I'd say it had a heavy DT core, right? So when I first started working with ILEETA, there was Monadnock was huge. Bob Hindi that was a big deal, like the Hindi cap, and like how you're wearing things on your belt. This is these were real subjects. These are real courses. Anything that had to do with DT was probably going to get some type of presence. There would be something there. There was probably always a session on ASP or something from Monadnock or something on the PR24. And of course, this is a thing that was going out when I joined Border Patrol. I'm not sure if we were issued a PR24 or maybe they took them away from us to the academy or something. For the younger folks online, they're Googling PR24s right now. It's like a long baton with like a stick on the end of it, right? And there was usually like one guy in a department or agency that could use it, like Bruce Lee, and then there was other guys that had a baseball bat with like a weird stick hanging off of it that was kind of getting in the way. I know that wasn't the way we're supposed to be trained, Joe. It wasn't what I was supposed to get from it, but those were real classes at ILEETA back in the day. And I think it kind of leaned in towards the original, part of the core. I mean, law enforcement training in the beginning. I can remember guys I worked with when I was at PATC. There was a guy named Mike Sergi. He was an Italian guy out of Indianapolis, did a whole career, 20, 25 years or something like that. And he had his ID cards, right? He had his back in the day, I guess these things just look like something you can make with a photocopier today, but this was like the official, I guess is what made you cop in Indy back in the 60s or something. And the first one he had a whole bunch of them in his wallet. And he had this one, the first one he had, here's this really good looking guy with this black wavy hair, right? It's a really good looking Italian kid. And he had them all subsequent years, like they must have got them like every 2 or 3 years. And every single one that he had after this, he was getting harder and harder. You can see his nose getting kind of twisted. You can see his ears cauliflowering like an MMA fighter. I'm like, what the hell, man? What kind of job was this in Indy? And I mean, every one of these ID cards, he kept getting rougher and rougher looking. And I see him as this guy in his 70s. And I'm like, Mike, what the hell did you do? I mean, what was the job like? He's like, buddy, it was Friday night at the fights every night. I was like, man, it must have been, right? It was crazy. So ILEETA and ASLET, I think, and it's just my perspective because I never really spoke to Ed about this. I was too green to talk to him about broader concepts about what does this mean? But that was a core that ran through ILEETA for sure. And it's interesting now to see it because I started with ILEETA, and I guarantee you there was no technical instruction going on. My course was the first computer-based technical thing that was going on. Ed was like, give it a shot. Give the kid a shot. The computer's a thing, right? Ed knew it was a thing. He knew computers were coming. But it's really gratifying now to see Instructor Z, and I see guys that are doing things that again are taking, it is a core of what they're doing, technical training that is not a thing where someone's not scratching their head saying, man, should we have this? Yeah, absolutely, we should have it. Absolutely. So I'm interested to see really how that's developed, and just to see what this take looks like. It's like I've been Rip Van Winkle. I've been gone for a while. I can't wait to come back and see it.
I don't think most
well,
people
you haven't
flying.
You haven't been to a conference with Emerson Hour.
I have not. No, that's right.
So,
I mean,
so now we talked about last week. We talked about Emerson Hour a little bit.
Yeah.
Not to turn this into a plug for Emerson Hour.
Oh, but do
Monday night, 1900 Emerson Hour. It is the can't miss event of the conference.
Yeah,
so,
it's got to be, and just looking at that thing. Of course, when I saw what you were doing, and you can see the lean into TED Talks and things like that, right? I mean, it's obviously this is a group of people that you've grabbed, that you've asked to speak, and you guys know how really ratcheted, nerve-wracking that can be, right? Because it's one thing to do your class, whatever your class is, right? Whatever your gig is. And I didn't realize years ago that I was a prop guy. I thought I was just a trainer and a law enforcement instructor, but I mean, I'm teaching PowerPoint, right? So I'm like a prop guy. I got a thing, hey, this is my thing. It'll spin around if you press this button. And when you look at a comedian, I'm like the plop chicken guy, right? I'm like the rubber chicken floating around. I didn't know that. I thought I was a serious law enforcement instructor doing narcotics and homicide work. That Emerson Hour is a completely different animal. And the fact that there is nothing but them, and they've got a limited time in which to answer a question, and it is just them speaking, I can only imagine that's got to bring out some emotion in that person speaking for sure, because it's stripping them of what they would typically do, regardless of what your subject is, whether it's DT or weapons or instruction at whatever level at the academies or wherever they're teaching. It's stripping all that away, and you're really getting down to that person, and that's going to make it personal. And when you do that, you better lock the door, because that's that changes everything.
Well, you're going to be laughing. You're probably going to be crying. So don't be shy about bringing the tissues.
Right. Emerson Hour. You'll laugh. You'll cry.
And it's only 1 hour, and you're going to walk out of there emotionally drained.
The suspense leading up to that is phenomenal.
Who's speaking this year, Todd?
Yeah, I can't tell you.
And Todd, you're right. Don't forget the Kleenex box. Our good friend Kim Schlau has been bringing a box of Kleenexes for several years.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. When you really get down and talk to people individually, and Joe's kind of mentioned this, training is one thing. Training is kind of a controlled environment, and especially as an instructor, you've obviously got material that you're covering and you're working with people. But once the class is over, and once the class is done, when that person comes up afterwards and says, hey, can we talk for a minute? And you've seen this before in other people's classes. That's where the real deal is sometimes, right? That can really get personal, because now this person really wants to talk to you, and they really want to engage you. And Yeah, that can be really, really powerful. It sounds like you guys have channeled that with this Emerson hour. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, and what's amazing is that each night of the conference, of the hospitality events, gives you the opportunity to have those one-on-one conversations or small group conversations, but the depth of the conversations following an event like Emerson Hour, it's a phenomenal way to start off the week. It truly is.
Yeah, that's it. I used to teach a instructor development course years ago, and it was the last courses I taught for PATC. It was a 40-hour course on instructor development, and it was just me teaching. And there's a thing about instructor development when you're working with people that want to be instructors, they want to be new instructors. And, one of the things I would talk about would be fear, like what are we afraid of? And, speaking in public and speaking, especially amongst our peers, is really, that's the deal, right? And it's not so much speaking in front of your peers. That's the deal. It's the fear of failing in front of your peers. This is what caused that fear. You often hear people in the military and law enforcement talk about, I'm doing this for the men that I'm working with, for the people that I'm working with. I'm doing this for my peers. Flag and country and all that stuff is great when you're somewhere, but when you're actually doing it, you say that I'm doing it for these guys. And when you're teaching, the fear is really that you're going to fail in front of your peers. And that is so powerful, such a powerful motivator. So I was talking about that one time. I was talking about that in my instructor development class, about how that fear, what that fear is and how that fear is real. And it's okay to have that. And after the session, and it's just a thing about instructor development, right? That's what I'm talking about, is instructor development. But after I get done doing that, I'm sharing personal stories about fear. I told them that when I was a kid, my dad and I were working on a building. We were in a bank building. I still remember the bank building. And my dad told me, don't touch that extension cord, right? It's like laying in water or something. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I reached down, I touched that extension cord. And when I touched that thing, it nearly blew me off the building. And my dad was a big, big man. He was hot, right? He was hot. He came out, and of course I know now why he was hot, because he was afraid, right? He was afraid that, his son just got electrocuted. And I think this is the type of thing where dad's like, don't tell your mom, right? This is like, not tell your mother about this at all. But he was super pissed because I touched it. He said, I told you not to touch it, and you did touch it. And even to this day, it's not like a incomprehensible, it's not like a thing I can't function with, but heavy electricity, like when you flip a huge breaker on, that still sort of like catches my attention, and being really high above something really catches my attention. And I told my class this, and it was just a little bit of, personal thing about me. At the end of this class, I had a mounted officer. This guy was like AJ squared away, right? And he was in uniform in class. And, he was on, I don't know what type of bike he was on, something about Harley or something, but he is AJ squared away. And you could tell, the shiny boots and the whole thing you get with like the CHP guys that are mounted. And he comes up, he says, hey, can we talk for a minute? I said, sure. And he said, I'm like, what's this guy want to talk about? He's like, I got a thing where I'm kind of afraid of heights. And I said, well, I get that, man. I mean, heights are sucking. I'm not really down for heights. He's like, no, it's actually kind of a thing. And, I think he's, in the beginning, I think he's maybe just kind of kidding or something, but turns out he's not kidding. And he said, it's beginning to affect my response. It's beginning to affect my calls for service. So I'm routing myself around the city so I'm not going over overpasses. And he said, I just wanted to, I think it's something I need to talk about. And of course, I'm the guy teaching instructor development, right? This is like kind of outside my purview, but this is the training this guy needs, right? This is the lesson that he needs now. And my mom was a nurse, right? She was a psych nurse. And, after the session, I said, well, let me make a couple phone calls, and of course, this is like career ending stuff if you don't play it right. Right. This is a big deal. And so I called my mom and I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? And she's like, these are some numbers and these are some directions for this. This is a real thing, but it's also, it's also manageable, right? It's a thing that you can actually deal with and address. But yeah, when you get down to talking to people about personal things about you, you open up that door, and it can come back for sure.
I think being vulnerable when you're teaching a class really hammers home some emotions, and people listen a little more intently.
It makes you relatable because remember, you're not famous and nobody knows who you are.
That's right, man. You're not. You're not.
Right? It makes you relatable.
You've seen instructors before that are not, and you don't have to name names, but you've seen instructors before that are really kind of distant and really have a pretty big aura about them, and they're really not relatable. When we do hiring for police technical, the instructors that we were looking for at the time, and are really not the smartest person in the room, right? You don't need to be the smartest person in the room. The word that we always used was accessible. If it was a technical subject, I would have people tell me, you should hire Bobby. Bobby is great at this thing. He is like the smartest guy. He's perfect in this thing. And I'm like, well, is he someone you'd want to hang out with? Is he someone that you'd want to kick it with for an evening? And they're like, oh, hell no, I'm not hanging out with Bobby. Like, no way, dude. I'm
a little less smart.
Yeah, I know. And like, well, that's not the person we need, right? We need someone that's accessible, someone that knows, social media investigations, but someone that when I call him up, I can talk to him about this thing. He's not going to be condescending to me because I don't know what this thing is, or I don't know how to navigate this whole technical structure. So yeah, making yourself accessible is like super critical. And even when, and you've seen the best instructors do this, people that are super, super good, they're like, hey, what can I do for you? How can I help you? Just like Mass did with me. He's like, hey, I'm just a guy. I'm like, no, you're not. You were Masad Ayub. You're not just a guy. You're like, stuff. Accessibility is a big deal. Big deal.
It's a superpower. It really is. In our space, I would say it absolutely is a superpower that if you are the firearms guy, or you're the DT guy, or the tech guy, or whatever, it's what can connect you to that person that much better, just by being that accessible on, hey, I do want to talk to you about wellness. And I, being the wellness guy in many of these conversations, I would say that it's never been, my speaking point on this has never been that it should be about the peer support person or that, psych person who's working in the department. You want the DT instructor, the driving instructor, the Tom Mansons to be the person who can talk wellness, because when you're there, they're going to come talk to you. They're not looking for the peer support person. Be accessible. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's a superpower.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I was in a class in Texas early on in my career, and I'm standing at the door as the people are coming in, right? Students are coming in, and I'm standing there, and I had this officer tell me, he said, are you the one teaching the computer class today? I said, yeah, I'm the guy. He's like, well, let me tell you something. He said, first of all, cops hate computers, and they hate computer classes. And he's telling me this as he's walking in the room, right? And when you look at that, this is a thing that I think as instructors we always need to be aware of, that students are often threatened by instruction, right? Because it's fear generating in a lot of ways. Yeah. That when you go to a class, it's almost a tacit acknowledgement that there's something I don't have, right? There's a tacit acknowledgement that I don't have some of this thing. And when you get these other type A personalities in law enforcement, like this guy coming in my room saying, they don't, law enforcement doesn't like this, and they're not going to like you. This is like a challenge, is like a defensive structure, right? Because he wants to put up this barrier. And interesting with that class, I'm just teaching my class on PowerPoint. I'm glad to have everyone in the room. And after talking to the guy at the end of my 2 days, I had a couple of days to work with him. He's like, "Hey, that was a really good class. Sorry if I was a little gruff when I came in." It's like, no,
better
man.
than I thought it was going to be is one of the highest compliments I will ever receive.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, hey, we're coming up on the bottom of the hour here. Let me go around the horn just real quick. Todd, any final comments or questions for Tom?
Well, I'm glad you're coming back to the conference. I look forward to seeing you. It was great talking to you last week. It was great talking and visiting with you this evening. How many days do we have here, Brian?
We have 27.
27 days.
27. So if you haven't got your class done yet, start working on it. Joe, any final comments for Tom?
Really looking forward to seeing you in person at the conference, Tom, and everybody else. And you hit the nail on the head when you said it's like the class reunion. 100%. I love watching guys like yourself and other folks come in that are that reunion experience. Like, it's just so cool. I have my own version of it, but I like it. Maybe it's a little weird, but I like standing back and just watching all of that magic happen. For the group, do not forget that the guidebook app is out, thanks to the work from the sponsor from Caliber Press there, making that guidebook possible for us. So please download the app, get in there. It's a little different this year. I'm super excited about some of the features that are available this year that haven't been in the past. So please go check it out.
Awesome. Guys, thank you again. Thank you for letting me be here. Look forward to seeing everyone in St. Louis, and I'll see you in 27 days.
Sounds awesome. Good. Looking forward to seeing you, Tom. Todd, Joe, Tom, you all have a wonderful night. Thanks for joining us. And everybody out there, we will see you in 27 days. Have a great night.
Thanks, all.